Hey, investors, welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to discuss the best way to structure your real estate investing business or entity structure. If this is your first time listening to the show, we discuss real estate, we discuss investing, and we discuss building wealth. Today, I'm bringing on expert Deanna Kahn from DK Law. This is something she specializes on with her law firm, amongst many other things, but she also has a very unique lens that she looks through because she owns several different companies involved in real estate, property management, rentals. And so she has a very unique perspective on how this should work. So welcome, Deanna, to the show.
Thank you for having me, David. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, today we're actually going to get into a few keys. Some of those are what real estate investors need in place when they purchase their first rental, how to set it up, what state it should be in, if the LLC name matters, how much it costs, and a little bit more. But can you give us a little bit of background of how you got into law? Yeah, just give us a little bit of background of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I was always going to be a lawyer. I didn't think I was going to be a real estate lawyer. I thought I was going to, do mergers and acquisitions, legal rights, whatever it is that you hear about like on TV. I was in real estate right before law school, put off law school for a few years, went to law school, never going to do real estate was my mantra going in. But I think sometimes we have callings, and I think regardless if you're in law school or you're a doctor, you're always going to have a 9 to 5 job if you're not investing in real estate. That's my strong key. And I vertically integrate all of my business to build wealth for myself and my clients. And a lot of my law firm sort of naturally evolved as I sort of screwed things up for myself, I think is the best way to put it. I am a very type A perfectionist. So it was all right, well, they can't handle my properties. Let me do a property management company, and I need to structure myself. And then because I have that legal education, I started sort of being that one-stop shop of helping others not make the same mistakes I did.
Gotcha. And then for investors, first-time investors that are purchasing their first property, what is your legal advice for how they should set themselves up?
I'm going to give you a very long-winded answer, but I feel like it's going to basically give you a great idea of what you need to work towards really quickly. So bear with me. It's really stupid, but it works really well. You're born, you're a baby. I know. Just bear with it. You're born, you are basically everything you own fits in a backpack. So in my world, in the world that you live in, when you're born, you have a backpack and it's on and you carry it and you buy a house, you buy investment properties, all of that goes into this bag. That's life. Everything that you own when you die is in this backpack. And the structures of entities and the structures of life can be equated to this backpack very easily. So just bear with me. It makes a lot of sense. I know it's really silly, but you get married, you buy a house, it goes in your bag. You make money, it goes in your bag. Your investment properties, if you don't have an entity structure, it goes in the bag. That's just the simple life that we live in. So here's the problem. If you don't have any entity structures, if you don't have anything set up and you put your rental properties in the same name as your primary residence, it's all in the same bag. As a lawyer, if a tenant walks into my office and says, I want to sue David, I'm like, okay, cool. Why do you want to sue him? And he says, he or she, whatever. They say the ceiling exploded on me because, the plywood was not put into the joist and the ceiling cracked down on my head. I'm like, okay, cool. Thanks for letting me know. What are your damages? No, we don't ask that question. No lawyer asks that question. They say, tell me more. In the tell me more question, the first question I'm going to ask is, what's the property address? As a lawyer with a property address, within 2 minutes, I can find you, David. I can find what's in your bag. I can find what cars you drive. I can find your social media account. I can find what your cars are worth, what your primary residence is worth, and what your debt is. All within probably 3 minutes of talking to that tenant. So here's the thing. I make 40% of every lawsuit that's on a contingency basis. So if everything is in one bag, do I really care about the tenant's total damages? If I know that if I say, hey, David, I'm going to sue you for $40,000, I know in a lawsuit, I can now bring your car into it, your primary residence, everything that's in that bag. Here's the issue. When you don't have yourself set up and I serve you, all I got to do is squeeze a little bit because your entire bag is kind of there. Everything's up for grabs. Your primary residence is up for grabs. Your inheritance is up for grabs. Maybe your grandmother is 98 years old and she's about to give you $1 million. That's up for grabs too, because if she passes away during the lawsuit, it's going to take 5 years. It's all in the same bag. And that's really that entity structure. So what happens if you have an LLC? It's a water bottle. Your primary, your rental property is a water bottle. I don't know if I have a water bottle.
I got one.
I got it right here. It's body armor. This is your rental license. This is like your rental property is this.
Gotcha.
If you don't have anything, goes in the bag. If I sue you, that water bottle is going to spill all over your entire life. It's going to get wet. When you have an LLC, we are essentially setting up that this rental property is going in a knapsack inside that same bag. I've now separated that water bottle from everything else in your life. In order for me to say, David, I'm going to take stuff out of your bag, I have to prove that your LLC structure is set up in a way that's just to protect you and you're not running it like a real business. In other words, I have to pierce the corporate veil to now touch the rest of your bag. Most investors have heard that word. They don't know what it means. In this stupid bag example, it's essentially taking a knife and trying to pierce that knapsack inside your book bag. If I can somehow do that, this water bottle now has a bunch of holes and it's leaking into your personal stuff. That is what I'm trying to do to pierce the corporate veil. I'll get into like how do we do that essentially, but you creating an LLC for your rental properties or whatever is essentially putting something around that water bottle before it goes into your stuff. Now, if you're an investor, I'm going to talk about 5-year plan, 10-year plan, and sort of the visuals with this bag, and then I'll kind of wind back up to kind of give you the advice. But you've heard about trusts. You've heard about LLCs. People are like, what's a trust? It's so complicated. Literally, I'll explain it to you in 1 minute. Less than a minute. Let's go. You come into my office. You say, I have this backpack. I've got LLCs in there. It's all mixed up with, my dog. It's in there. The only thing that's not in there are kids because they can't breathe in bags. So you say, how do I protect my personal for my business? Even if I have an LLC. And I say, okay, cool. Let's do a trust. And you're like, what is a trust? It's a new bag. That's all it is. You're going to come to my office. We're going to create a new bag. You got the bag you're born with. You're stuck with that one because it was born. It was given to you. It was created by your parents when you were born. It belongs to you. It's attached to you. You can't get rid of it. A trust is the idea that you're going to create a new bag from scratch. And that bag does not belong to you. It belongs to your children. And you say, I don't own that bag. I'm gifting it to my kids today. I'm gifting it to my kids. However, in a span of time, sometime in the future, when a triggering event occurs, such as death or incapacity. And until those two events occur, this new bag I've created with a lawyer, I'm going to carry it with me. It's mine. I control it. I open and close it. It's just like the other bag I got. I have full control. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take all your personal stuff out of the bag you were born with and put it in the trust. Now, if your rental properties are in there in a knapsack and I pierce the corporate veil and it's now leaking into your personal stuff, what's in your bag? Absolutely nothing. So if you get sued and then we somehow pierce that corporate veil, there's nothing for them to sue you in because everything you own is in another entity for your personal stuff. And it doesn't belong to you. You've already gifted it to your kids. So a lawyer's like, well, how do I jump out of one bag to the other? You're going to have to prove that I gave my kids my personal house, my personal bank account, all of my personal stuff with the intent to avoid this lawsuit. Good luck proving that. So to kind of unwind all of that, right? When you become an investor, everything is in one bag and you're susceptible to a lawsuit. Lawyers are good people. We're great people. We like to stick up for the right thing. 40% of $1 million looks great. If you're not worth $1 million and I can't sue you for that, now I'm looking at it a little bit different. If that same tenant comes into, my office and says, I want to sue because the ceiling exploded on me, and I look you up, David, and I see you don't own anything personally, then I'm like, okay, what is he worth? And I look up the rental property. It's in an LLC, and now I can't even find your name. Now all of a sudden, as a lawyer, I'm like, okay, she's got a good case, but I got to figure out who owns the LLC. And if I somehow figure that out, and I figure out who it belongs to, and then I find you, David, and there's nothing in your personal bag, now I got to go to court and I got to tell a judge, he's got an LLC, he's got a business structure, he set it up to avoid this lawsuit. So I want to pierce the corporate veil. Okay, cool. Let's say we bypass that. Now I'm like, well, judge, he doesn't have a house. He's clearly living in it. So judge is like, yep, but he's got a trust and it's for his kids and he's gifted it to his kids once he dies. He's just holding it. And I'm like, okay, judge, but he created that to avoid this particular lawsuit. Judge is going to look at me and be like, prove it. It's a lot harder. It's not impossible. Nothing is foolproof. But when you're investing and you've got tenants and you've got lots of liabilities and you've got a lot of issues, what you need to do is set yourself up in a way that when you do get hit with a lawsuit, you're not panicked. You're not like, holy moly, I got my bag. What am I going to do with it? You're going to be like, I've got a trust set up. I've got a business entity set up. I've got all these things set up. You want to sue me, go ahead. It's going to be a little bit of a time for you to be able to prove that you can get all of my personal assets. So that bag works really perfect.
I want to ask this question because I think it's super important and it supersedes what you just said. What is the worst thing an investor can do on their first property?
A worse thing?
Yeah, the worst thing.
Purchase it in your personal name.
So we'll start there. So the worst thing you can possibly do, and this is from Diana Khan, is purchase a property in your personal name. And that
If
is
it's an investment property.
It's an investment property. And that is because you can get sued for all your other stuff because it's all in that same bag. I like that example. Really great example. Thank you for sharing that. It's all in the same bag, whether that's your brokerage account that's under, we'll use me. Hopefully people aren't suing me, David Hathaway. If it's my brokerage account or whatever, retirement, I don't think you can totally go after retirement, or can you? But everything in that bag that's under David Hathaway can be my car, whatever. You have savings accounts, checkings accounts, your what, I don't even know what people use, your Bitcoin accounts, whatever else you got, they can go after. So that's the worst possible thing you can. And so if you don't want to do the worst possible thing, you can, and you just talked about trust and LLC, somebody's going to purchase their first property today. They're like, I'm purchasing my property tomorrow. I don't know what to do. We'll assume that don't worry about the contract and how they wrote it, but what are you saying? Hey, you need to do X to make this.
You need to put it in an LLC. Even if you're listening to this and you're like, I have one investment property, it's already in my personal name, I'm screwed. Diana Khan said I'm screwed. You're not. You're not. Switch it into an LLC. Create an LLC today. Maryland will not tax you if you're the owner of the property and you're the owner of the LLC. Switching it from one to the other is it's a non-taxable event. And what that means is you're going to pay recording, you're going to pay for the deed, but you're not going to pay taxes because it's not seen as a purchase. So you can still switch it into your LLC name, and now you've got that business structure.
Gotcha. And that's what's going to provide the protection from a lawsuit, not necessarily to that property in essence. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. You're the specialist, but that's going to protect the other stuff in the bag. Doesn't necessarily protect that one property, but instead of then being able to grab your lunch bag and grab your car and grab your house, now it just, all they can do is focus on this one, what your example was, the bottle in the knapsack, correct? Everything in that knapsack that's in that LLC they can go after, but nothing else in the bag.
Exactly. And that's essentially why you should have a business structure. Now, here's the thing, and people tell me all this all the time. Well, I bought it in my personal name and I flipped it and then I sold it, and like, who cares about the LLC? Because I would have just opened an LLC, done the flip or done the construction, closed the LLC down, so there's no difference because I don't own the property anymore.
Yeah.
Well, statute of limitation is not 3 years. It is 3 years, but it's 3 years from the time of discovery of an issue. So guess what? If you flip the property today and you didn't pull proper permits and you did a whole flip, let's say, and there's 36 recessed lightings in there that you did, and you didn't pull an electrical permit, and everything is great, and the buyer goes into the property and they're happy and they did a home inspection, and it's a buyer beware state and blah, 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 blah. 3 years later, they go sell the property. Somebody does a home inspection and is like, hey, you know what? There's 36 recessed lightings here that are brand new, and there was never an electrical permit pulled. And this particular buyer wants to do, like, they want it permitted accurately. If you didn't pull the permit, you might have done proper work, but that inspector for the city might come in and be like, we need to pull all the lighting out because we can't see what's behind the lights.
Yeah.
And guess what? Are you going to get sued? Because there's somebody thinking, well, there's so many protections for that to happen. We'll get into those. I can get into those. Happy to go over that and why that could still be an impact on you. But the truth of the matter is it's 3 years from time of discovery.
Yeah, that's eye-opening. And you didn't use a bad example. You didn't use like, hey, contractor came in, did the work maybe not right, which is what I thought you were going to say. And then the electrical problem sparked and the house burned down and people died. And now you are liable for somebody else's work, even though you didn't tell the contractor, hey, do the electrical work this way. That could be like worst case scenario of like, hey, people died and you're the one that did this huge renovation and they didn't pull the right permits. So, and it was an electrical fire. Would that be like worst case scenario?
Yeah, there's quite a lot. I mean, there's that, there's lead paint, there's EPA violations, there's, dusting that you did when you replaced the windows. I mean, I have probably like 2 dozen examples just sitting in my office today So there's quite a lot, but it's from time of discovery.
Gotcha.
And I think what a lot of investors get lost in is they say, yeah, but it's a buyer beware state. Let me tell you, my job is to pierce that idea. And I have contracts and I have lots of statutes. And I don't have to get you on not pulling a permit. I have to
Mhm.
get you on something in your contract. And if a lawyer is looking at your stuff, we're gonna find something.
And you're in this example, you're just saying, hey, this investor or flipper, I mean, they're an investor as well, and they are just saying, hey, I'm going to do it in my personal name. So, and all they're doing is basically avoiding the LLC, paying the LLC fee each year,
Hmm.
and they're just trying to save the $300 to do it in their personal name. Just
Yeah,
and you're saying, hey, that is like the worst thing. This goes back to the example. The worst thing you can do as an investor is put stuff in your personal name.
right.
Yeah.
And listen, I get the question, well, I have 5 properties, or I have 70, or I have 1. How many LLCs should I do to a business? This is a question that I get. I mean, if I got paid for every time I answer this question, I wouldn't need a job.
Hmm.
And you're going to hate my answer because the answer is that depends. I don't know. I don't know what an answer is. The right lawyer answer is 1 LLC per property. That is the most accurate answer any lawyer can give you. As somebody who has 70 properties, I'm gonna tell you that's a bullshit answer because 700, 70 properties times $300 a month. Now all of a sudden I'm looking at a bill that I'm like, holy moly, like that's a lot.
Yeah,
And
it's a lot of
it does.
paperwork. You got to do a lot of extra stuff too.
Right. That's looking at a CPA, that's 70 pass-through LLCs, that's bookkeeping, that's getting my rent paid to 70 different LLCs, and then having a holding company and then having to pay it out. It expands very quickly. So while that is the most accurate answer, I think your answer really should be is what is your liability level? And what I mean by that is, do you have a trust for your personal stuff? If
Uh-huh.
you have a trust for your personal stuff and you have 5 LLCs and you've divided 70 properties into 5, there's still nothing in your bag, right?
Yeah.
Because you have a trust and it's separate. So now we're not worried about your personal stuff. So then I can look at, well, how many properties do you have? What are they worth? How much money or income are you deriving for them? And how do we divide them amongst LLCs? So if you get sued with 1 LLC, your entire life is not defunct because all of your income is now being stagnant. Because remember, if I sue this LLC and you only have 1 and 70 properties are in it, I'm now looking at your books for those 70, and I, as a lawyer, am not necessarily looking at just the facts of your case. I'm also looking at how is your bookkeeping? Can I show negligence? Can I show that you're not a good business owner? Can I show that you blatantly ignored rules? Like there's a lot of little things that I'm focusing on that you're not even thinking about.
I love that question of how many LLCs should you have for property. I'd be interested in your advice to me. So the advice that I give, and I don't give legal advice, I just say, hey, this is what I do, and follow it or not, is based upon the amount of equity that I have in properties. And so when I think of LLCs, I say, how much equity do you have in that LLC? And and so if you leverage all those properties to 90% or 95%, there's not very much equity for somebody to go after. And is that
Exactly.
a good way to look at it from an investment standpoint of just how much equity you have in the properties?
That's how I do mine. So that should give you the answer right there.
Okay,
I
great.
don't,
Yeah, I love
yeah,
it.
I don't necessarily, again, it's really difficult because the legal answer is 1 LLC per property. Somebody who has a lot of properties, I'm like, yeah, that is not realistic. And I do exactly what you do. I have my personal stuff in a trust. I make sure that the LLCs that I do have operating agreements that I didn't pull from LegalZoom.
Mhm,
I actually paid somebody to write 1, and then I use it across all 7, just change the names. But
mhm.
they're legally accurate in the state of Maryland. They work with that state requirements, with the statutes. Pay a lawyer for 1, use it for all of them. Make sure your lawyer is okay with that there's no copyright infringement on that. And then make sure that when you have the 5, 6 LLCs that you've got, that you're running those 5 or 6 LLCs like a business accurately.
Gotcha. What are the costs to if somebody wants to set up their LLC, they're going to purchase property tomorrow, or they accidentally purchased one in their own name or a couple in their own name, and they want to switch it
Yep.
over. What's the cost to go through DK Law to get their LLC set up? and get their
So
operating agreement and articles of whatever the articles thing is called, incorporation.
we do about $1,000 for a package, and that package would be, operating agreements, your LLC, making sure that it works, and putting that rental property into the deed of taking care of that transfer for you.
Awesome.
That's without the state fees, and the state fees are not much. Don't quote me exactly because they do change, but I think it's like $150 if you're willing to wait 4 weeks for the LLC, or it maxes at like $450 if you want the state of Maryland to give you an LLC within 24 hours. So it really, there's like a middle tier as well that's like 2 weeks, and I think that one's like $250.
Yeah, you're just talking about the cost of the LLC, and I
Right.
want to
Yeah.
say it's like $300 annually or $200 annually. I'm not
It's
positive.
it was like $290 annually for that LLC.
So
And then I guess second mistake that I would tell everybody, if you're doing your own, if you're doing an LLC your own, you're going to like, businessexpress.com or whatever, or .gov that Maryland has, do not use yourself as a resident agent. Do not do it, because if you own the property, if you own an LLC, the idea of a resident agent is literally, where do you get your mail? It's not who gets to make decisions on the company. It's not who owns the company. It's who is authorized to receive my mail. And 9 out of 10 times, people who create LLCs put their personal name on there. So what did they just do? When I look up the LLC, I can figure out who owns the property, and now I can do a search on David Hathaway. You should use a third party for your LLC name, right? Like the resident agent literally just gets your mail. So you could use a third party entity. They charge like $150 a year. You could use my law firm. And the whole idea is just to keep the anonymity on who actually owns that LLC.
gotcha. Could you use one of your LLCs to be the resident agent for your other
You can.
LLC and vice versa?
Yes.
So you just got all this like switch and keep yourself out of everything?
If you look up my 7 companies, every single one of them uses my law firm as a resident agent.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm going to rapid fire some just really important things that I think are for investors. Does the name of the LLC matter?
No.
Should it be Diana Khan?
Definitely not. Make it as anonymous as you can. Initials, names, whatever you want. My best favorite one is if you're purchasing a property, it should be, if you're purchasing a property 123 Main Street, make your LLC 123 Main Street LLC.
If that's available, or just
Correct.
Yeah. No. Okay. So don't use your name. Love that. As far as state, does it matter what state? I mean, there's always hey, you should put your LLC in Wyoming. Hey, you should put your Delaware is also thrown out there a lot. I mean, does it matter, or are they going to have to do, and specifically for investors purchasing in Baltimore, what state should they put their LLC in?
A lawyer is going to come after me when I say this, because the answer is going to be, most lawyers will be like, Nevada, this one, Wyoming, you need this. Please keep it in Maryland. Here's the thing. The jurisdiction, if you get sued, is going to be Maryland. The property is in Maryland. You're not running a business that's like selling goods online, and you need the business benefits of what Delaware is going to provide or what Nevada is going to provide. Because if it involves a property, your jurisdiction, your laws are going to be stuck to the city and state that you live in or that the property is in. So I think this whole idea of like Nevada has benefits, absolutely. They 100% do. That is 100% accurate. But if it's a rental property and you own it in Baltimore City and I sue you for that rental property, the only thing I'm applying is Maryland laws, because it's an entity that is in Maryland. Mm-hmm. If you are going to structure yourself where your LLCs have a holding company, your holding company should be in those states, because the holding company is not going to change or evolve with every property you open and close. And that holding company is going to give you all those tax benefits that Nevada is going to bring or Wyoming is going to bring. And there is definitely benefits there. But if it's like an LLC for a rental property, please just use Maryland.
Gotcha. I think thank you for that answer. I think the other thing is, if you don't have an LLC in Maryland and you end up selling a property and you don't live in Maryland, you have to immediately pay all of the taxes. And I'm not a CPA, but 8%. You have to pay all of your taxes at closing instead of paying them at the end of the year, which can be painful, and Maryland wants their taxes right at closing. And you're going to go, what? I got to pay.
And it's much higher.
It's painful. So that's another benefit of, if you're owning in Baltimore, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because
No, you're 100% right.
So that's the other benefit of owning in Baltimore, is that you get to take all of your gross profit, and then your fees from closing. And then at the end of the year, then you can structure your taxes how you need to structure them, give Maryland the money instead of Maryland taking out their taxes first if you do not have a Maryland. So that is like painful almost if you don't have and you'll learn real quick after your first deal. You go, ooh, that was painful. What do I not? I don't want that to happen again. Anything else as far as like LLCs and maybe somebody that's like, I've heard of like S Corps or C Corps. Should that be involved in the process, or is the LLC just the way to go, simplistic, to protect myself?
So it depends on how big of a scheme, or I'm going to say scheme. That's not a good word. Retract that. I mean, it's a scheme, but whatever.
Yeah, how big
It
of an
depends.
investment or portfolio you have?
Yeah, because if you have one rental property, an LLC is a pass-through entity. You're still putting in your taxes. You're not really getting a lot of double like tax benefits. You can do business expenses, which is great, but I just don't think it's worth doing an S Corp or C Corp if you're going to kind of stick to a smaller scale. You still get the same protections. You don't really need to do too evasive a process.
Gotcha.
If you're going to have multiple properties, I'll tell you just kind of the way I'm structured. So I think that while I don't hold all the cards, as somebody who's done quite a lot of research for my personal liability threshold, the way I have it structured is I have multiple LLCs. I have the equity spread out amongst a few LLCs, and each one runs as its own business. So rent goes in, we pay expenses. Same thing with the second one. Rent goes in, we pay expenses. And then I have a holding company above those LLCs. So that holding company is a business entity that is essentially a property manager, right? Like my company oversees these companies. So then every single LLC pays to the holding company a fee. Hey, I've got profit. My profit is $10. Guess what I do? $8 of that profit is going to the holding company because that's the parent company that's overseeing all of these. And that parent company actually pays me a paycheck, and it takes out taxes.
Awesome answer. We haven't really discussed like bank accounts with LLCs. Is that something that's important? Can you have 3 LLCs and one single bank account? Does each LLC need to have their own bank account?
Listen, when I tell people the purpose of the LLC is for it to be run like a business, it's a hybrid between an S Corp and like a solo, right? You're supposed to run it like a business. So the question I always get, or like I tell my paralegals when we're trying to figure out who to sue at what level and all of that is, if it acts like a duck and smells like a duck, it's a duck, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with a business entity. If you're going to create an LLC to say that you have corporate protection from your personal stuff, you need to be acting like a business. You're not a business who, like a Domino's pizza, is not going to take its profit and put it in the CEO's name in their personal bank account. It's not going to put it into a business account for like a Wingstop that they also own. They're going to put it in that bank account that's under Domino's Pizza's name. And when you look at it from a threshold that's not business entities or investors, where we have a lot more fluidity on what we do, and you look at it at a much greater scheme, you're going to sort of like understand the process. So yeah, if you have an LLC, make sure money's going into a business account and you're running it like a business, because if it looks like a business and acts like a business, it's a business and you're going to get the business protections. If you are setting up an LLC and then you're not acting like a business, you're literally doing nothing for yourself.
Gotcha. So super important. If you're 123 Main Street LLC, you need to have a bank account called 123 Main Street that you get an EIN, and your profits go in there, for your rent goes in there first. And then you can disperse it out from there afterwards. And same thing with all your other LLCs. It's not going to go in Dave Hathaway's personal bank account, because then your LLC does nothing and there was no reason for you to set it up in the first place because you're not protecting yourself. Is that accurate?
Correct. You got 100%. And then I think I'm going to put this like last little nugget in there is,
sure,
if you have a rental property, right, and the property's name is under 123 Main Street, you're going to have home insurance that covers 123 Main Street LLC. Your tenants, if you have tenants and you're not doing like a flip or, construction or whatever, if you're doing a buy and hold, your tenants should be legally required to get renters insurance. There's 2 benefits to that. The first is their stuff is protected if there's an accident. The second is you now have a lease term that most tenants don't follow. So if you ever need to evict them, chances are that's going to be a breach of lease you can find very quickly.
Ooh,
but
sorry about that. I like that.
Yeah, the other factor is that when they have renters insurance, There's a question on the renter's insurance policy that says, is there an additional insured? And the answer to that should be yes, it's the LLC that owns the property. Why is that so important? It's because I'll just use a personal example because personal examples are always much easier to understand. I lived in a condo. My husband at that time was a cigarette smoker. Thankfully, he's not anymore because otherwise we would have been divorced. He accidentally set fire to the place. We're just not going to talk about it. It was just a rough time in our marriage.
Gotcha.
It was a condo in Roland Park, Baltimore, which if you're familiar with that area, that tells you a lot because it's mostly lawyers and judges. And it was, unfortunately, the fire started on the deck, on the patio.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an HOA, there was a condo, and we were renters. So there was 4 different insurance companies involved when the fire happened. And it didn't happen inside our property, but when we had the fire, there was lots of smoke, there was lots of issues, so our entire inside needed to get switched out, even though we didn't have fire inside the property because smoke does a lot to property and items. So guess what? We had renters insurance, and what happened was, because there was so many insurance companies, the issues were covered right away. What you don't realize is that insurance companies start negotiating on whose fault was it and whose liability is going to actually cover the full damage.
Mm-hmm.
So my renter's insurance, of course, my husband set fire to the place, and we were at fault.
Yeah.
So the HOA and the condo were like, yeah, we're not covering that. And at that time, I didn't have a law firm. I was a law student. I was starving. So I think the damage was like $20,000. But to me, that was like life-changing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And our renter's insurance policy basically got stuck with the low end of the stick because we had the additional insured as the landlord. So the landlord's insurance was like, it doesn't really matter if the landlord was at fault or not because both insurance companies covered him. So he bounced out of the argument. His personal liability was gone because he was covered by 2 different insurance policies, not one. So it didn't matter if it was my fault and my insurance had to cover it because he was covered under that policy. He was also covered in the other one. So guess what happens when there's like insurance? Insurance will sometimes cover the issue, but they'll look for liability and then personally sue the person liable. So what the landlord did by naming himself in my insurance policy and his is he was guaranteed that he was out of the lawsuit. It didn't matter if I was negligent or not. Both insurance companies can't bring me in personally because I'm a covered entity.
Mm-hmm.
So he now doesn't care what I did on the property because he's covered by both insurances. So what you're doing is you're preventing personal liability by being personally named in both policies. And that is something that's fantastic and is definitely going to work out for you.
Gotcha. So the advice there is to ask your renters to get renter's insurance, number one, and then put your entity that owns the property as the party insured or the other party insured by that insurance policy.
Yep. So no matter what it is, if it ends up being the renter's insurance has to cover it, the renter's insurance is going to be like, hey, like let's look at the landlord and see if there's personal liability or not. It doesn't really matter because you're covered. So now all of a sudden that insurance company is not going to touch you because you're still a covered entity. Your negligence doesn't really matter because you're covered under that insurance. And if it wants to make an argument to the other one, it's now not your problem because you're covered by 2 different insurance policies, not one.
Gotcha. Is there anything else you guys do? Entity structure, we went over entity structure. Is there anything else that DK Law can do that maybe a first-time investor might need?
So we do the LLC startups.
Mm-hmm.
We also, so for startup investors, we'll do everything from setting up a structure for 1-year goal to 30-year goal, because what your goal is now is going to evolve. And I'll tell you right now, I have clients who come to me when they have 100 properties, and it is expensive for me to fix you. It is very expensive. And I think when we get excited to start into a new business venture, we're not thinking about a CPA. We're not thinking about bank statements. We're not thinking about all of that. So most of the time, people don't come to me when they're buying their first property.
Mm-hmm.
They're busy thinking about hardwood floors and, LVP. And they're busy excited about what kind of kitchen islands are we going to put in? And this is so cool. And let's paint it green. They're thinking about all the things that you do when you have one business and you're excited. But if you're not seeing a lawyer, not doing that startup, by the time you actually get to me, you're now worth a lot more. You've got a lot more liabilities. And now all of a sudden, instead of building a bag and building a structure that is much cheaper when you do it right the first time, we're looking at building multiple bags and taking stuff out and figuring out how to take the water bottle back out. And that itself on a backpack example is very easy. In a business example, it's, your taxes for 2 years. It's, your insurance policies, it's, your water bills, it's a lot. So when you are a first-time investor, a lawyer is and should be your first phone call. And it's not because the lawyer's getting you out of trouble, because I think lawyers have this reputation of, I only call a lawyer when I'm in trouble. Call a lawyer to set you up so that when you do get in trouble, you're not losing sleep because you spent $700 in the beginning to be
Hmm.
done 100% accurate, rather than then now you're going to pay me $500 an hour to fix your issue if you get sued and then we find out your business structure wasn't set up right. Because $500 an hour adds up a lot quicker than $700 in the front end to talk about what's your plan now and what's your plan in 5 years, because I'm not fixing things. Not fixing things is much cheaper than fixing things.
Gotcha. Okay. And people that want to reach out to you, or maybe they're not even looking in Maryland, they're looking in some other state. Do you guys take care of people that are in other states? Does it matter? Is there a specialty localized on the East Coast or?
I do. We're actually rolling out a website now. It's going to be rolled out. We're actually doing business advising across all 50 states, and I actually do mentorship on business setups and like how to set yourself up. My bread and butter is don't wait till things go bad. So I will do mentorship. I will set you up in any state. It's not really legal advice; it's business advice, and we've structured that way. But I do it across 50 state lines. Happy to help you set up. And then in Maryland, I will also do, the trust entities and all of that. If you're like in Arizona, I'll do a trust setup there as well, but on a business financial advice as a financial advisor, but we'll give you the same documents, but then there will be like you need a deed, and that's something that I can work with one of my partners to get set up.
What's that legal specialty? Like if you're Google searching for a legal specialty, what is it for entity structure for lawyers? Is there a specialty that you're looking for?
So it's business. It's actually like business structure, business setup.
Uh-huh.
That's the first one, and then I always say the second thing you should Google is estate planning,
Mhm.
comprehensive estate planning, because trusts are seen to be an estate plan, but any good business also has a trust. So for me, you should find a lawyer that does both, because if you're setting up a business that's going to be lucrative, make money, and you want to be protected, right? Your personal stuff needs an estate plan. And guess what? If you die tomorrow, not that I want you to die, David, if you don't have your business structure set up accurately, you don't have a succession plan for a business. And
Yeah.
if you're self employed, your children are waiting on your work to make money. And if you don't have a succession plan for all of your LLCs set up, now your spouse is left alone with a bunch of LLCs that they don't have legal rights to continue working on.
Yeah.
So that business entity structure really does play very well with estate planning and comprehensive estate planning goals.
Awesome. How can investors or anybody that has a business that's wanting that structure, how can they reach out to you?
My cell number is 443-739-6724. Shoot me a text. I'm sure David's going to tag me. Any social media, send me a message. I try to make it very easy to reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. Since you are not charging me $700 an hour or
500.
$500 an hour, I really appreciate that. I'm sure, and you provided a lot of value for those investors that want to set up their structure out the gates instead of having to come behind them once they own 5 or 10 properties and having to redo it, because that is painful. So thank you. And guys, if you have any question, guys, girls, investors, throw them in the comments for Deanna. Throw them to me if you have questions of how I'm set up. I don't technically know if I totally go into the whole fine lines of how I'm set up, but very very similar to how Deanna said that she's set up. So I'm happy about that. But yeah, reach out to us if you have any questions, and thank you guys for watching.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
yeah, see ya.